Footloose. I finally got the new 4K in the mail. Great looking Steelbook. Finally just sat down and watched it. Let's talk about it. I think this is a great movie that, it's kind of weird. This movie's a classic, but people don't really dive deeper into it. It's just a fun movie that people like because Kevin Bacon's in it. It's got a great soundtrack, right? But other than that, it's not really like, no one's going, oh, Footloose, that's a great movie because I think movies like this do get that kind of status where they become movies that everybody's seen, everybody likes, they're classics, and nobody really dives deeper into it. And look how great this Steelbook is. Look at that artwork. That's just great. All the songs listed on the back, made to actually look like a cassette tape. You get a Blu-ray disc, which I actually appreciate, but if I didn't get a Blu-ray disc, wasn't gonna like poo-poo on that. You get the 4K disc in there. It's a great looking release. Anyways, this movie obviously does have a great soundtrack, but what makes this movie great is you gotta understand about this movie. I guess some of my viewers watching this video maybe a little bit younger, you probably don't know this. But basically in the 80s, it was like what was known as the Satanic Panic, which was a time period in the 80s where like rock and roll was evil, this was evil, that was evil, and which there was always that kind of thing lurking around throughout the 70s, 60s, especially the 50s, right? But in the 80s, it really came back in like full force. There were like books written about how like Barbie and fucking Care Bears were fucking evil. Like and those kind of books would sell like millions of copies. And it's like the dumbest thing. And it was all over the news. It was like, Dungeons and Dragons is fucking evil and is gonna kill your kid because some kid committed suicide. All those stories that you would kind of hear about from the 80s were a big deal. And so this movie's kind of like about church in this like religious town, like banning dance, an expression of self, of music, and kind of basically it's a commentary on that satanic panic era of stuff, like where you have these religious right-wing people coming in and they demand that something that they disagree with, they believe is evil without fully understanding it. They try to get rid of expression, whether that be through art, which dancing is a form of art, music's a form of art, right? It was film, whatever it was, but in this movie it's dance. And it's kind of like teenagers rebelling against that kind of disgusting ideology. And that's what Footloose is. That's what this movie is. And I think it's a really good movie for that because, some people might watch this movie now who haven't like grown up in the 80s or didn't really, watch this movie when they were younger. And might go, well, this is just an 80s movie. I would say that's fine because this movie is a commentary of 80s time, and it's a commentary that's still relevant. We still see the right wing, cry about, oh, it's woke, oh, whatever, those types of ideologies. We see them trying to ban books. We see this kind of thing that is representative in this movie with like this religious town trying to ban dance, And, obviously I think that's a goofier example. Like, I don't think there's like an actual town that's like trying to ban dancing, right? They may try, but it's like, you're not gonna like get rid of that, right? But like, there's those types of there's similar things. It's kind of an interesting look and time capsule at the 80s and what was going on with that. But it's also relevant to now. And so it's kind of this weird time capsule of the 80s, but not. It's got a great soundtrack, of course. Everybody knows the soundtrack to this movie. So yeah, I will say some people have criticized this 4K, said it doesn't look the greatest. And I get that. But I disagree. I think this is the best this film has ever looked. I think one thing that might make it harder to be like, oh, it stands out when you're watching it, is that most of this movie is a pretty dull town and drab color-wise. But that's kind of the point, because it's taking place in this town that's like like dancing and expression. So it's a pretty dull, boring town that, throughout later scenes of the movie. So I think that's why there's some scenes that will really stand out to you more in 4K, and then there's other scenes that won't. It's because like these scenes with lots of color, life to them, like the dancing, the music, right? That's all gonna look the best compared to like the more duller scenes. I also think that while I like this movie, it's a pretty dully directed movie in some instances, and part of that is by design, but at other times it's just not. And I think that's why this movie is just like, when you watch this movie, it's kind of a dull looking movie, just in general. So I think the 4K is best it's ever looked. And look, if you don't have this movie, because let's be real, a lot of these classic movies, when they get a 4K, this is the first time some people are grabbing these, including myself. I did not have Footloose. I wanted to get it, just I don't know why I never grabbed it. Here's the 4K. Here's my excuse to grab it. It's a great movie. I love it, and now I have it. So yeah, I don't know. I recommend that you get that 4K. If you really love Footloose, you gotta have that release. It's a great release. Let me know your thoughts. Like, share, and subscribe.